Normally Nicole's here. It's the Monday schmooze.
Right.
Yeah.
So is it still a schmooze?
I don't know if it's still. Well,
I think it can be a schmooze.
Time will tell. It didn't. It was not instantly dubbed the Monday schmooze. It evolved into that through the years. So you got a lot to live up to.
This was the morning crasher, Thursday morning crasher. Usually it's just me and Rever.
Yeah.
Are you okay being this far apart from each other?
Yeah, actually, I'm pretty comfortable.
Let's get into the big story because it's really starting to get personal. It is the big showdown on Saturday in Ann Arbor. How about this? Amazingly, given how good these programs have been through the years, this is just the third time they've met with both of them in the top 10, first time in 25 years. Interestingly, the other two were top 5 matchups. Penn State won in 94. That was their fabulous undefeated team. Michigan returned the favor in 97. That team, of course, went on to win a share of the national title. This is a huge game, no doubt about it. I think time will tell whether it's as big as those two, depending on how the season resolves itself for these two teams. But what interests you the most here?
You know, I love both of these rushing attacks, and they're going up against these rushing defenses that are also really good. But both these teams have a top 25 rusher. You also have defenses that rank in the top 7 against rushing defenses in the FBS. So I just love whenever you get a matchup that is strength versus strength. And I think Blake Corum, Nicholas Singleton are going to make this a very fun and entertaining and tough game.
Maybe the second most important position in the game. I think anytime when you cite those kind of stats, what these two teams have accomplished so far, doesn't it have to come down to quarterback play? I mean, you look at Sean Clifford, he's the veteran guy. He's not talented as JJ. Sean Clifford has been through the wars, if you will, more. He's probably been in these type of situations more. The Penn State group has certainly had a more difficult schedule. They've been in closer games. And then JJ, all the talent in the world, but not the reps. And I think Manny Diaz is going to get after JJ because if you study JJ, and this is pretty common for young quarterbacks, so it's not just about JJ, being in the pocket under pressure is the most difficult thing to learn as a quarterback because you don't ever get those reps. No one lets their defensive line beat the heck out of their quarterback in a spring or fall scrimmage. And so I think quarterback will play a major role in this game. It just makes sense.
Well, and to your point about Manny Diaz, I mean, this is a high-risk, high-reward defense. Like, they're going to get after him.
Yeah, I think the trickiest part about Manny Diaz, you don't usually talk about defensive coordinators as good play callers. Manny Diaz is one that you can. In other words, if you look at most of the defense, if you look at Iowa's defense, Illinois' defense, they're pretty predictable. 1st and 10, it's going to be inside and front, situation, pressure situations, pressure defenses. Manny Diaz, he, as you say, Nicole, he's liable to bring the pressure on 1st down, and that's what makes him, in my opinion, such a good defensive play caller.
So when you say that you think that Penn State has played the most difficult schedule of the two, I mean, I'm sure like if you mathematically averaged out how good the opponents are, I would agree with that just because of how bad Michigan's non-conference was, and Penn State had Auburn, who I guess is okay to not very good.
Sounds better.
Yeah, it sounds better than they actually
correct.
are. But I mean, don't you think Michigan's proven something here these last couple of games? Certainly against, I mean, Iowa's defense is really good, and they did a nice job against him. I mean, I'm not pushing back on that. I'm just saying I feel like I know a lot more about Michigan offensively than I did 2 weeks ago.
Absolutely, and I guess my comments would be more appropriate prior to the Iowa game. But I go back to Penn State Purdue, right? Sean Clifford has to make that throw at the end of the game. Right. Purdue can't run the ball at the end of the game, so that Penn State defense has to stop the run. I mean, that was a battle. I think just going on the road at Auburn, even though they're not a great team right now, but the SEC, they're not really a great team. I do think of the two schedules, I think Penn State has played the more difficult schedule.
Fair enough. So quarterback play is really interesting to both of you, kind of the running back play. How do we feel about these two defenses? You guys were talking about Manny Diaz and kind of his ability to force the issue. How do you think Michigan's defense stacks up here? I think we came into this year with all kinds of question marks about replacing Hutchinson and Ojabo. I mean, statistically, this is a really good unit.
Yeah, I think they figured out how to get that pass rush and get that pressure on other quarterbacks. I think we still want to learn more about the secondary, right? I think that's what could be very interesting about going up against an experienced quarterback in Sean Clifford. But I think they have figured those things out. They have figured out ways to get that pressure. Again, they've been really good against the run. So I think Michigan has answered those questions so far this year.
Remember now, defenses are always they always respond to the offense. So when you talk about Michigan's defense, is Penn State going to be a balanced attack? You know, that's up to Mike Yurcich, right? So the defense is a little trickier to predict as you go into the game. I think they're both really good defenses. I mean, I think that's where it starts. They both have recruited well. They both have a lot of talent. But what do they have to defend on offense? Is Michigan going to close the ranks in? Are they going to play with 3 tight ends? Well, then, you know, Penn State's defense, I mean, inside and in front, they're going to be tough to move. Or is Penn State or is Michigan going to spread out their offense?
Well, this has to be the most balanced offense that Penn State's defense has faced, right? I mean, the fact that Michigan's so good at can win games both ways. I mean, I think that's going to be an interesting challenge. I think, too, when you look at it the opposite way, Penn State's really struggled on third down to stay on the field offensively, right? They rank 104th in the country on third down conversion. So there's a couple different spots there where I think, you know, again, how does Penn State handle a team that can do both really well, pass and run the ball? And then can Penn State extend its drives?
Yeah, to your point, Nicole, I think Michigan could probably win the game by running it and not being balanced. I mean, I think they want to be balanced, and they have been balanced. I don't think Penn State can. I think Penn State needs to be balanced more than Michigan needs to be balanced, because at some point Michigan can close in the formation and just make it a 9-on-7 game.
You need good Sean Clifford.
You do.
Absolutely.
I mean, like Sean Clifford was not good against Northwestern, right? I mean, they turned the ball 5 times. There was one that he got away with that absolutely should have been a turnover as well. I mean, it was like right through a defensive back's hand. So very easily could have been 6. Now, the weather was terrible, and so I know that is part of it, but there is still this group of Penn State fans, and I think to a certain extent Penn State media, who are interested in seeing Drew Aller in some sort of a pressure situation. You know, do you bring him in for a series here and a series there? And I just wonder if that narrative, particularly given that there was a bye week and it gives you a lot of time to talk about things like that, I wonder whether that narrative starts to become bigger and louder here.
Well, and James Franklin has used him, right? Like, he has been putting him in games.
But not
in meaningful, not in high pressure situations, but enough to burn the red shirt, right?
Yes.
I mean, that's already gone. So I think, you know, that's one where we went through this with Michigan for a year and a half, right? You feel like the backup guy has maybe a higher ceiling, and so you look at that. But Sean Clifford played really, really well at the start of the season. I mean,
Absolutely.
If you get that Sean Clifford, this is not a question.
Right, but you didn't have that Sean Clifford against Northwestern last time we saw him. So, and Aller didn't come in that game, remember, right? So that was the first game that he hadn't played all year. And when he was in the one pressure situation he was in, it was only because Clifford was injured. Right, in the Purdue game. Other than that, it's kind of been strategically sprinkling him in. I don't know.
To put Aller in the game with Clifford healthy, just to make the change, wow.
No, I'm not advocating.
I don't think it's
I wouldn't
coming.
do it for 100 years. No,
all I'm saying is it's out there.
Oh, well, yeah. The second-team quarterback is always the most popular player on any team, right? I mean, that's just the way it is. I mean, that's the fan's job, is to like the second-team quarterback more than the starting quarterback. I mean,
part of the job description.
Yeah. I mean,
what about the bye week? Do we feel like the bye week favors Penn State at all?
I think because of what they looked like against Northwestern, yes. Had they done really good against Northwestern and it would have been one-sided and the weather would have been nice and they would have just ran through Northwestern, then I'd say no. I wish we could play 7 days later. But the way they played against Northwestern, I still think Purdue was a tough game. I still think Auburn was a tough game. I think they needed this break.
I think for Michigan, too, last week was so emotional. It was a really tough game, I made no sweeping judgments on that team after, you know, you could see how shaken they were about Mike Hart's medical event. And so I think for them, knowing that he's okay and then also being able to get right back out there and play, I mean, I think that I don't know that a bye would have necessarily helped or done anything for them. So I agree with Jerry. I think for Penn State needing to reset. For Michigan, it's probably going to feel good just to get back out there after, all the emotions and everything that they were worried about last year.
Absolutely agree. I think that's exactly right. For Michigan, it was best to play last week and to play right away. And for Penn State, the week off was best. So I think they're both where they would like to be going into this game.
How much of a factor do you think it is at all? This is more on the coaches, I suppose. There have been narratives surrounding each one of these coaches. Now, I think Jim Harbaugh put a lot of it to rest last year by getting to the college football playoff. But again, his record against top 10 teams, they're 3-14 under Jim Harbaugh. James Franklin is 2-11 against ranked teams on the road as Penn State's head coach. So that is still part of what hangs over these guys. These are things we like to talk about. Does that impact in any way the thinking? Maybe I should go to you first, Jerry, as the person who's been in that spot as a coach. Does all that stuff weigh on your mind?
Yeah, everything weighs on your mind. I think Jim has to beat Ohio State again this year. I think he could lose to Penn State and beat Ohio State and he'd be fine. And I think he's back. I don't see any reason why we don't think Jim Harbaugh is a really good coach. I think a lot of us didn't think he was going to make it. And when I say we didn't think he was going to make it, beat Ohio State and go to the playoffs. Yep. He's a good coach. He had a good program. I think that's behind him unless things go really bad. I think this is different for James. I think James has a lot to prove, probably to himself and probably to the program. Remember, he won the Big Ten championship his third year at Penn State, and then we all talked about he was 11-11 in the last 22 games coming into the season. So I think he feels a lot more pressure than Jim does to win this game.
I completely agree. I don't hear or feel any of that around Michigan right now, and there was that heading into all their big games through last year until they did it. And I think with Penn State, we've just seen them when we were like, all right, do we buy them? Do we think this is the year? And then they play in Ohio State, typically Ohio State it is, and then there's that gap, right? And you see that gap and you see it play out, and that's what we end up talking about. And so I think it's really important for Penn State to play well, to keep this close, to be in a position to win. Again, James Franklin's late game management sometimes gets questioned too. So being in a position where, you're making the right calls, you're handling all those things. Those are a big deal for James Franklin to get right and to reframe some of those narratives.
Agree with both of you. Yeah, to me, it's much more on James in this game. And look, their team is seen as less than right now, right? You can look at the rankings, but I just think also the discussion is about Ohio State and Michigan. Yes. And oh, by the way, Penn State's still undefeated too. This is a way to erase, oh, by the way. This is a way to really elevate here. You go in and you win this game and all of that stuff we've been talking about goes away.
The only other way to erase it is to have two balanced divisions. But I won't talk about
I think it's not unreasonable to think that might happen, right? Or that there just won't be divisions at all.
Yeah.
I think you hear rumblings throughout college football that's a possibility. And certainly no one would like that more than Penn State. Our big stat playing off that game, which is at noon Eastern here on the network, it matches the top two scoring defenses in the nation. The Illini are first. The Gophers are second. By the way, the Big Ten has the top three and three of the top five. The last time a conference finished a season with the nation's top three scoring defenses was the Big Eight in 1967. So it's been a while since we have seen as dominant a defensive league as this one, at least in the early going. We're going to break down the Big Ten West a little bit later and kind of go through all the contenders. But just as a prelude to that, do you see these as the top two teams in the West, or is Purdue in that conversation? How do you see it?
Yeah, I think Purdue probably is. I continue to point this out, but Purdue could be undefeated right now. They were very close in two of those games.
Could be 2-4 also.
That's true.
Right.
That's also true.
Couple plays away
Every
from,
Purdue game is an adventure,
absolutely.
Basically. But no, I think you have to say Illinois is probably the favorite right now. And I recognize that we just went through saying 2 weeks ago that Minnesota was the clear favorite in this league. So I don't want to say it's like a clear favorite. And I'll also argue that I'll also point this out. I know this is not our network, but I love the ACC Coastal. It is one of the most chaotic divisions in all of college football. It feels like the Big Ten West is that division this year, where nationally everyone understands that this could be anyone's win. And so I think it's probably Illinois, though, because I think you have one of the best running backs in the country, one of the best defenses in the country, and that has been a formula to win the Big Ten West. how many times? I mean, that's where I think you have to give
I'd say every
the
time.
edge.
Yeah,
almost every time. That's what you want if you're in the Big
Yeah,
Ten West.
yeah,
So
for sure.
I think you go with them, and then you assume that Minnesota is going to bounce back from their performance 2 weeks ago and be a factor.
Seems like we've been here before in the West, right? I mean, this is year in and year out. You know, Purdue has the tiebreaker against Minnesota, and if they keep going, I mean, that obviously helps them. And their last crossover is Indiana, and that's an advantage to have Indiana as their crossover because it's always permanent. It's always a rival game. So, you know, it's going to be a good game no matter what, right? But you don't really look at the schedule and say, who's my third crossover? It's Indiana every year, right? So that helps Purdue. Illinois has, I think, Michigan and Michigan State left, so the Michigan one's going to be a tough out. So, you know, I don't think there is any favorite, right? I mean, mathematically, probably everybody can still make it, right? And so we usually are in the West, and I think crossovers are always important. And I'll say this for the 13th year in a row, I think an undefeated division team should go to Indianapolis regardless of their total record. Not the best divisional record, but if you have beaten all 6 teams, regardless of what your record is, you've proven yourself that you're the best of 7 in the West, and you should go to Indianapolis. So I don't know if anyone's in that situation right now.
Yeah, and I've never disagreed with that. I just think that you put yourself in a rough situation if that team then goes on and wins the Big Ten championship.
Right. So it's not
game.
about the players; it's about the championship
I'm
and the
just
money.
saying
I mean,
this is why you'd have the resistance. Yes.
Right, yeah,
yes.
okay.
But
as long as everyone's willing to admit
is
that.
that team worthy of going? Absolutely, 100%
Yeah.
agree with you. It's indisputable. I don't know how you could dispute.
Correct. You have proven that
team.
you are the best team in that division.
Absolutely.
Yes.
It's happened 2 or 4 times in the SEC.
It's like when, you know, in the Big 12 in these leagues that can do a full round robin, you actually can say, like, this is a team that's played everybody and beaten everybody if they're undefeated.
Let's dive into this game a little bit. To me, injuries are a huge part of this game, right? Mo Ibrahim and Tommy DeVito, again, you know, you kind of can go on what people have been saying all week, but I'm always let's get to Saturday and see who plays and who doesn't play. Those are both enormous players for their respective teams, and it feels to me like if one of them isn't available, it sways the balance. You agree?
I do, because when Mo was unavailable for Minnesota last time we saw them out, that offense looked totally different. Everything looked so much harder for Tanner Morgan, and it became difficult we saw, you know, there's that inexperience on the offensive line. You saw all the question marks that we had about that offense going in. For Illinois, though, I will say having Chase Brown is a luxury. I mean, that's someone you can rely on no matter who your quarterback is. And I think you saw Art Sikowski do some nice things and kind of manage the game in certain points last week. He obviously didn't score an offensive touchdown, but they didn't need one in that game. That was a defensive masterpiece, might be the nice way to put that one. But I think having Chase Brown is something that is a luxury if you are, you know, struggling at the quarterback position, or if Tony DeVito is not full strength. So I don't know. It felt like we've already seen what Minnesota, the drastic drop off for them if they're missing that key player.
Yeah, I disagree. You watch the tape. Mo is a great player, and he'd have made that offense look better. We're not giving enough credit to Ron English and the Purdue defense. They schemed Minnesota. So if Mo was going to be a major difference, he'd have had to break at least one tackle because Purdue outnumbered Minnesota at the line of scrimmage almost every single down. And so, yes, of course you miss Mo. But was he the difference? No. 3 picks by Tanner, being outnumbered at the line of scrimmage. That was the biggest difference.
You don't think having him as an option would have affected the way that Tanner Morgan
No, because when they give him whoever the tailback was, they were outnumbered.
But the threat of an explosive running back is my point. The experience that Mo brought, the what you know. I mean, I think we're going to disagree on this.
But Nicole, the intensity of putting more people in the box would have just increased with Mo.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, that game plan was probably to stop Mo. And then when he doesn't play, of course, that gives Purdue a little bit of advantage. But to watch that game and think that Minnesota would have won the game if Mo played, that's not fair to Purdue. I guarantee you.
I didn't say that. I just think it would have looked very different.
It'll look different. We could argue about very.
How big a deal do you see DeVito being in this game?
Probably more significant than how Mo impacted the Purdue game. You know, I mean, I think.
Because look, I mean,
Sikowski,
I would push back a little bit on Art in that game. He threw an interception at the goal line.
I'm not saying he was great.
He was a fraction of an inch from fumbling the game away.
I'm not saying he was great.
Yeah,
but
I hear
I'm saying
you.
he didn't ultimately cost them the
He
game.
did not. Oh, yes, I would agree with that. And their defense, can we just say, like, their defense is fabulous.
Well, so that's another
unbelievably
reason
good.
that,
Yes.
again, if I'm looking for positives or ways that Illinois can win this game, even
Yeah.
if they don't have their starting quarterback, you look at that defense. So I know Iowa struggles offensively, but they held them below their average in yards per play, rushing yards. I mean, this is just a really, really good defense.
I mean, it's amazing. Like, they are, you look at them defensively, they lead the nation in scoring D, quarterback hits, pressures, pass efficiency defense. I mean, this is the best in the nation. Right? So, and they have the top rushing defense in the Big Ten. So it's not like, well, they're really good against the pass, but you can run on them. No. Like, there is nothing that you can do well against them.
So does it transfer that if Purdue could shut down Minnesota's attack, that Illinois should be able to shut down Minnesota's attack?
I mean, to me, it does. Yeah.
To me, too.
Yeah.
I think Minnesota's going to have to break the code, okay, because it's on tape how they get stopped. Now, we can weigh in Mo and weigh back and forth. They'll obviously be better with Mo, but they have a schematic problem that they've got to solve.
So they are really well coached, right? And they had a bye.
Yeah, both these teams are really
No,
well.
I know, but I'm just saying Minnesota. So does the bye come at a really good time for them when they realize, oh my, like they?
Well, and
to
you also have
your
an
point.
injury, so yeah,
Yeah,
I
I
think
mean-
that's perfectly timed.
Right. So
to
you get Mo to get healthy, and yeah,
Right.
right. I agree. That's a given. But if you have a week like that where you say to yourself, I think they figured us out. Now, obviously, if that's what you saw when you turned on the film, that's what they saw too.
Absolutely.
So
I'm going to say to your question, yes. First of all, I think PJ's a great motivator. PJ feels like he's responsible for the emotions of his team, and he will have them ready. Joe Rossi is a terrific defensive coordinator. He'll have it ready. And Shiraka knows what everyone watched, right, with Purdue. So I think not only the injury, the week off for Minnesota was a godsend. I think it's perfect for them. So far, the two buys that the two teams coming off buys, I think we agree this was really a good buy. Whereas Michigan, as you said, Nicole, having a bye wouldn't help them.
Yeah.
But it helped Penn State, and in my opinion, it's helped Minnesota.
What do you think's going through Minnesota's mind as they're watching that 9-6 game? Like,
I don't know. What do you think?
I don't know. I mean, that's what I'm like. Is that intimidating? Are you scared of that? Are you like, oh, there's going to be lots of opportunities? Like, I don't know what you think.
I would think this. We can win without scoring a touchdown.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I look at that game and, I mean, Minnesota's defense is awfully good,
Also
right?
very good,
Like,
yeah.
the defense certainly did enough to beat Purdue. I mean, other than the one long run by Maccabee where they broke down. Were it not for that, they would have had every opportunity to win the game based on the defense. But, yeah, I don't know. I think both these teams look at this game and say they absolutely can win it. And that's the beauty of it, and major implications if they do. And we'll talk about that here down the line.
Right. I mean, the loser puts themselves in trouble.
Yeah, in a tough spot.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. You'd have two divisional losses or two conference losses. Saturday, we have two huge West Division matchups for you. First at noon Eastern, it's that battle between the Gophers and 24th-ranked Illinois that we were just talking about. Then at 7:30 Eastern, Nebraska and Purdue square off under the lights. Coverage starts with Big Ten Tailgate Saturday only on the Big Ten Network and the Fox Sports app. I know Minnesota-Illinois feels like the biggest game, but the winner of that Nebraska-Purdue game is guaranteed at a minimum being in a tie for first at the end of the day.
Amazing.
In the Big Ten. And yeah, it is amazing. I mean, tell me you had that on your bingo card after the Nebraska loss to Georgia Southern. I know I didn't. I'll fess up. I pretty much
That
thought.
was a non-conference loss. Again, that's how this works out.
Again, I just didn't see them being in this spot, right? They have rallied nicely, although, again, the schedule was advantageous for it. But how do you feel like they have turned it around here under Mickey Joseph?
Yeah, well, they're playing hard. I think like the way that they played the end of that Rutgers game to come back into it and to not give up the fight that they showed, I just thought that was something we hadn't seen. And I think that you can see that. Obviously, also Mickey Joseph made the change, the defensive coordinator, really putting his mark on this team. So I don't know about you, but I feel like it felt that fourth quarter against Rutgers felt very different, felt like a game that they would not have won under the previous regime.
Yeah, I'd agree on both points. I think making Bill Bush the defensive coordinator and simplifying the defense, because that's what Mickey wanted him to do. He felt like under Shernander they were a little bit too complicated. And Mickey is an emotional person, okay? And he believes the game is an emotional game. Scott Frost did not believe the game was an emotional game. And I think if you look at Scott's background, Tom Osborne looked like he wasn't an emotional guy, right? But they had great players, and they were a machine, and they had a really easy schedule. They played Oklahoma every year, and then after that, and Colorado got good for a little bit. And so I think Scott's perspective on the locker room and all that hurt him. And I think Mickey has parlayed that into an emotional team that plays the way you described the second half of Rutgers. He probably wasn't real quiet at halftime, I'm guessing. And, you know, that's a big part of it. And no matter all the changes we've seen in college football, emotions are still a big part of the game.
How about the fact that in the second halves of the two games with Mickey Joseph, the last two games, not all because he obviously the Oklahoma game, the last two games, they've given up 0 points in the second half. I mean, it kind of speaks to your point. Those are both the games with Bill Busch as the defensive coordinator. So I don't know, is that adjustments? Is that getting emotional at halftime and lighting a fire under guys? I don't know what it is, but whatever it is, Jerry, it's worked.
I think it all adds up. You know, I don't think it's ever really one single thing. You know, Bill may have made a great adjustment in one game and not in the other game. Mickey may have been emotional in one locker room and not. I mean, you just don't know. But it all adds up, and you never know when you've touched the nerve with your team, or you never know when you've made an adjustment that's going to work. But it's working under Mickey.
Yeah, and again, this is a team that we all know the record of how poorly they played in one-possession games under Scott Frost. So that's about how you're finishing game. That's about the second half. I mean, how many times do we see them go into the fourth quarter with a lead and blow it? So they're playing entirely differently if you're shutting teams out and coming back in games the way that they did against Rutgers. Again, these are just things that they're playing games that I don't think that they would have won the way that they did the last 2 weeks.
Absolutely. So what does Purdue need to do to beat them?
I think it's Aiden O'Connell. I know we love to talk about quarterbacks, and you know, so much of what Purdue does rides on his shoulder. Obviously, they've run the ball and they've won games that way this year too. But this is a Nebraska defense that still gives up a lot of passing plays, a lot of big passing plays, and so I think that that's probably where the game gets won.
No doubt. I mean, Bill Busch, we just sung his praises, and I think we'll continue to do because regardless of how the season ends, he's done a really good job. But man, he takes some risks, and they're playing cover one a lot, which is one middle safety and two wideouts being covered man. But he bump mans them, and I just think a lot of the routes that Jeff Brom dials up will really test the pass defense. So I know you mentioned pass defense. I would agree. And the reason is I think Bill takes some risks back there. And if he hadn't taken the risk against Rutgers and the other team that they beat, they probably wouldn't have won. Can he take the risks and beat Purdue would be my question.
All right. Should be a really interesting game. What about Wisconsin and Michigan State? The Badgers got back in the win column, taking down Northwestern. You know, honestly, look, part of it is a big accomplishment. There was a lot of emotion. Northwestern is just really, really struggling. But now they get another team that is really struggling in Michigan State. It just feels like it's really well set up for Wisconsin to build some momentum here.
It is, and this is a Michigan State team that has now lost 4 straight games, and obviously you've got a bye coming up, but you got 2 good opponents right on the other side of this Wisconsin game as well. So for Michigan State, to me, it's about, you know, this being an inflection point, this being a time where you decide what do you want this season to be, and then also, you know, we were just talking about pass defense. Michigan State's really struggling there. And you have a Wisconsin offense that we saw come alive last week, but is still in the bottom half of the conference as a passing offense. So, you know, can you get anything going? Can you see any improvement? Can Michigan State take any sort of strides? Because otherwise, you know, you're looking at 2 more potential losses after this.
Right.
That's a really rough stretch for Mel Tucker and company.
Yeah, I'll be surprised if Mel doesn't really take some chances on defense. I mean, I think he'll pressure the heck out of Wisconsin. When you watch that Wisconsin-Northwestern game, I mean, I know Northwestern is struggling defensively. That's probably the biggest struggle they've had in 2 years. I mean, they weren't even covering Wisconsin's receivers. I mean, it was almost like it was a Thursday practice. And so it's hard to gauge if this Wisconsin, after the emotion, after beating a team that they were better than anyway, but I don't see Wisconsin being as good as they were against Northwestern. And I think Mel will test them and pressure Wisconsin a lot.
Here's the problem, right? I mean, that was what Michigan State flourished off of over the first couple of games, right?
Yeah.
They were leading the nation in sacks and tackles for loss. I mean, they have 2 sacks over the last 4 games. I mean, philosophically, I have to believe they're still approaching it the same way. It just feels like they haven't been able to get home in any way.
They're going to have to add rushes. I mean, and that's probably what I was trying to say about Mel. I think he'll pressure him, but it won't be with 4. It'll be with 5, and sometimes it'll be with 6.
Just take some big gambles.
Absolutely. The future schedule looks tough, as you mentioned, Nicole. I mean, they've lost, what, 4 in a row.
I mean, obviously they've dealt with injuries on the defensive side at positions that they basically couldn't, but they got to figure something else. You got to get through the rest of the season.
Yeah. What about when Michigan State's on the field? Been a struggle there, too, frankly. I think, surprisingly, they really can't run the ball at all, and I think it's put a lot of pressure on Peyton Thorne, and it's been tough go for him, a lot of turnover issues.
It's definitely, you felt that pressure on Peyton Thorne, and we talk about this a lot looking back because Kenneth Walker made it look so easy, but he really did mask a lot, and that makes, that you were talking about the box earlier and what the quarterback ends up facing, that changes it for Peyton Thorne. Obviously, he's got great receivers, but you can just tell that he's pressing and he doesn't have that safety valve, who's more than a safety valve. Kenneth Walker was more than that, but just as such a home run threat all the time, you could tell that offense just worked differently.
Yeah, I think what we're seeing is if you undervalued Kenneth Walker, you made a mistake, and their answers really are recruiting. I mean, that's the only way you can solve, in my opinion, their offensive problems. I mean, of course they can improve. Everybody can improve regardless of where you start. But, I mean, what's the identity of their offense? Who are you stopping when you defend Michigan State? I mean, you're not stopping anyone. You're filling every gap and you're keeping the ball inside and in front. And you probably have better players on defense than they do on offense because Kenneth Walker's no longer on campus.
Yeah, absolutely. And, the flip side, of course, is when you can't run the ball like they did a year ago, your defense is on the field a lot, and we have seen a struggle.
Defense is on the field
a ton.
all the time.
I mean, they're 129th in the nation in time of possession, so there are only 2 teams behind them.
Could be a problem.
Taking a look at the Big Ten West, a 3-way tie for the lead entering this weekend between Illinois, Purdue, and Nebraska. Minnesota is even in the loss column with those 3, and then Wisconsin, Iowa, Northwestern all at 1 and 2. I look at this and I say everyone other than Iowa and Northwestern is in this conversation. So before we get into who we think is going to win it, do we agree those 2 won't win it?
Yeah, I do. I mean, unless Iowa suddenly has a different offense.
Okay.
Yeah.
Sure, I'll agree. To move the conversation along. I'm not going to disagree.
Well, you could disagree.
No, I don't want to.
I just
Jerry
didn't think
just
that we needed
chose
I am not a
to be
contrarian.
nice.
You guys know
I just didn't think we needed to treat them in the same way we were going to treat the other
Fair.
schools.
That's,
Okay.
Jerry's choosing to be nice.
Yeah.
I'd just like to record that.
Yeah, no,
posterity.
I think it's once every 5 years, middle of October, Thursday. That's his pattern. Okay, so then, as for the teams that we think are in this race, we've talked a lot about Illinois so far, but what do you think of their positioning here in the West?
Yeah, I know we talk about the schedule, and part of the reason entering the year felt very strongly about Minnesota and Purdue was because of the way the schedule fell for them. It's sort of setting itself up. So Illinois will have more of a challenge, absolutely. But Michigan State is one of their crossover games. We were just talking about how much they've been struggling. I also just feel like they're the best team right now. Illinois is one of the best running backs in the country, if not the best running back in the country, one of the best defenses in the country. That is how you win the Big Ten West, and that is what has won this division so many times. Brett Bielema knows exactly what it takes, and so I really like them. I don't really see that they're going to let up. I feel like this is consistent. This is something that can travel. Quarterback's health, absolutely a factor, but the pieces are there for what you would, if you were starting from scratch, blank sheet of paper, and you're saying, what do you need to win this division? They have that.
Schedule-wise, they have to go to Michigan, right? I mean, that is the one, right? So and you've already lost that one game against Indiana.
Right.
I agree with you on everything about the way the team is composed.
But don't you think that that this division is kind of up in the air? And
I think it could absolutely be won with 2 losses.
Yeah, that's what I think.
Right, but I think once you get to 3, then you might get into some sort of crazy tiebreaker.
So you're picking Illinois over Minnesota?
Okay, listen, 2 weeks ago, I was really high on Minnesota. It was their division.
It was a yes or no question.
Right now, yes,
Okay,
but I
so
don't feel
I- so-
great about
so-
picking anyone to win this division right
Okay.
now.
So we're just talking Illinois? Is that what we're doing?
You can do whatever you want to do. This is your show.
There's no rules.
Okay, so if Illinois,
kind of rules.
if Illinois wins, they'll stay in the hunt. If they lose to Minnesota, they're out of the hunt.
That's probably true.
I think I'm with you, and I think that's
'Cause
why I
that's the
mentioned the Michigan
three-loss.
game, because I don't
Yeah.
see them going to Michigan and winning. I don't think it's out of question they go to Michigan.
And not to
and
beat
win.
a dead horse to death.
Yes.
Okay, but losing the 2 crossover games makes them
Yes.
not the ability not to win the West.
But that's what
They could beat everybody else in the West, lose to Indiana and Michigan, and not go to the championship game.
Yes.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And you're not going to get any disagreement that that's probably not the greatest setup, other than you want your best teams in terms of ranking, right? I mean, that's the argument. But anyway, we can we can adjudicate that another time.
I didn't mean to derail the conversation.
Although you did twice.
Yeah.
Okay, so what about Minnesota? So I mean, so it seems like what you're saying is Minnesota, Indiana or Minnesota, Illinois, I should say, is like almost not an elimination game, but it'd be a really good idea to win it.
The loser of that game will not win the West.
Okay.
That's
all right.
probably true.
What do you think of the Gophers, the team that I think all of us would have sat up here 2 weeks ago and said it's the best team?
I also think entering the season you could see, right? If you're saying
Yes.
Tanner Morgan and Kirk Soraka, if that marriage works the way that we've seen it, they're absolutely going to be in the mix there. So I think all of that's true. But again, it's really that 2-loss threshold. I feel like now that we have just worked that through publicly, I feel very strongly about that. But I think they have the pieces. We've talked about the balance offensively, defensively, the balance within the offense. So theoretically, yes, but I completely agree with you, Jerry, about this being the game to determine who the favorite is.
Right, which brings us to Purdue, who has the most favorable schedule and the ability to win out. And the interesting thing about Purdue, they beat themselves maybe not as much as Maryland beat themselves, but Purdue controls this, because think about the games they lost. The Syracuse game, even though it wasn't a conference game, it was penalties, right?
Yep.
Think about the Penn State game they won. If they get 1 first down at the end of that game and kill the clock, I mean, they are in position. But not only are they in position, it's totally in their control, in my opinion. They're not playing anybody they can't beat when you look at the pieces, the players.
2 losses in the last minute to teams that are currently undefeated, right? I mean, that's what their season has been. Now, again, look, I don't want to be the contrarian, but I mean, fortunate to beat Maryland, fortunate to beat Florida Atlantic. I mean, again, you can construct scenarios, but I think we all agree, good team, really good defense. It is steadily improved here. That was where they made the biggest jump last year, and I think it's pretty clear that's still a really good unit. And when he's on, they have maybe the second best quarterback in the Big Ten.
They've won games with running the ball.
Yes, right. That's the new thing.
That is the new thing. And I keep thinking, what if they had that in the Penn State game, right? They just needed to run the ball a couple times.
Wait a second. I don't want to be a contrarian, but last week they only rushed for 37 yards.
Not last week. The one before.
When they beat Minnesota, they rushed for more than Minnesota.
That one. That's the one.
I know. That's why he's so good, right? You can rush Minnesota and rush for 37 yards the following week and win both games. Yeah. And so, me citing the last drive of the fourth quarter against Penn State, I'm contradicting myself, really. I mean, they can win without running it, and at times they can win it running it more than they throw it. Figure that one out.
So I still think Wisconsin is in this thing. And I want to get a sense of where you guys stand on them. But I don't think it is at all unreasonable to think that they could have a shot at it. Are you guys? Because their toughest crossover was Ohio State.
Right.
Right. So, but I mean, they'd have to go unbeaten. But they have Minnesota and Purdue both at home. I don't know. I mean, I guess I don't think it's totally out of the question that Wisconsin's in this conference.
And what are you basing that on? The Northwestern game?
No, I'm just basing it on
math.
They fired the coach,
I'm sure in Nebraska. I think Nebraska's still in it too.
With the interim coach.
I think Nebraska's still in it too. I mean, I just don't think there's that much of a separation, right? And again, like Illinois has got to go to Michigan. Wisconsin's already played its toughest crossover.
So you think 2 places that fired their coach could win their division? I know you do a lot of stats and research.
Yeah.
Tell me when that's ever happened before.
Well, it would only be one of them that would actually ultimately win it. You're saying a team that fired its coach wins the division? Yeah, I don't know. We'd have to get. We'd have to get
there are
the
some
BTN
famous
stats guys.
examples, though, of the interim coach becoming like a great all-time winner. Dabo Swinney is one. I don't know what it was.
So you've rejected the premise of Wisconsin. Have you rejected the premise?
I am, the jury is out on Wisconsin for me because I feel like a couple of times this season, we collectively, the college football viewers, have overreacted to games against Northwestern, right? I think that was the way that we overreacted to what we saw in Nebraska in week 0.
Yeah.
So I'm choosing not to and to wait to see what we see from Wisconsin offensively at least another week.
That's fair enough. I totally agree. And I was saying that before the Northwestern game, that I just don't think they're totally out of it. I still think they have some pretty good pieces, and we'll see. But obviously, you disagree. I think
something's wrong with the system.
I'd put them
two fired
third.
coaches
I'd
could
put
win
them-
their
I'd
division.
put them third.
It either accents the divisions are ridiculous the way they're set up, or to fire 2 coaches and then win the division, there's something wrong on campus then. There's something wrong with the system, just the fact that could happen.
You know what? I don't think Jerry likes the division.
I love leaders and legends.
What you do really well is reading subtleties, right?
This is that. That's what makes me a good reporter.
Nicole, I loved leaders and legends because everyone had a chance to be upward mobile.
People just couldn't remember.
All right.
That was
Oh,
the problem.
the name thing was ridiculous.
Can we
To
talk?
overreact over 2 names?
Is Nebraska still on this thing?
They're not mathematically.
Yeah, I mean
related.
they're 2 and
Yeah.
1. Like they're in a better spot than Wisconsin is.
I'm with Jerry though. I mean, there is something wrong.
I think
with
so.
If you're making a change and then you still have a chance to win it.
Yeah, and I
Probably
see
not
them
gonna
as a longer shot than I do Wisconsin. I just think they have
Yeah.
more question marks on their team. You agree? Or?
Yeah. I think they all have a shot. I think Nebraska has less of a shot maybe than Illinois, Minnesota, Purdue. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'm not sure how much ground we covered there. You're stewing over there.
I am. I'm
He's
mad
worked
about
out.
the whole thing.